You have to hold this really close to your mouth.
Got it. Okay.
Good morning. Good morning. Whoa, is that high? Okay, I'll put it down here.
When are you guys going to St. Louis?
It's great to see everybody.
Well, we're going to go to Stiffman's,
Right.
but I don't know when yet. Maybe May 19th.
I will have a couple of announcements at the end of our program today. And I know these two men don't need an introduction, but who is it for me not to do an introduction? Dr. Stephen Moffic, award-winning psychiatrist, writer, and speaker, has been named the 12th recipient of the Abraham L. Halpern, MD, Humanitarian Award of the American Association for Social Psychiatry. That's a lot. He will present the Abraham Halpern Humanitarian Award, Is It Really an Impossible Dream? At the Humanitarian Forum on Monday, May 6th in New York at the 2024 annual meeting of the American Psychiatric Association. We'll have to hear about that. Rabbi Evan Moffic, this is right from our website, respected as a Jewish thought leader, both in Chicago area and nationally, that's true. Rabbi Evan Moffic is a charismatic, yes, engaging leader, yes, both in our congregation and beyond. He is dedicated to...
They know the real story.
Right, this isn't a discussion. You can't debate me. He is dedicated to interfaith outreach. I know that's true. Social justice, I know that's true. And inspiring a modern, relevant spirituality for today's world, while leading worship, officiating at weddings, including interfaith and LGBTQIA. Rabbi loves to write and work, and he's our own Rabbi Moffic.
Thank you, sir. So nice to see everybody. And you want to start?
Are you going to give us questions or?
Yeah.
Why don't you, I'll let you give an opening thing. I do have questions, of course. When don't I have questions? But you could give like an opening salvo.
Okay, I can start. I think one of the reasons we thought about doing this, not just because it's wonderful to get together, but there are a lot of interesting parallels between the work of a psychiatrist and the work of rabbis. And we did a panel about 10 years ago at the APA? Yeah. And I researched what, is this a common occurrence where you have a father who's a psychiatrist and a son or a child who's a rabbi? And it's not. In fact, much more common is the opposite, where you have almost like in you remember the book The Chosen, where you have the rabbi and his son becomes a psychiatrist. That is the much more common occurrence. And I kind of was interested as to why that is. And I think partly it's the role of culture, where people say, what kind of job is it for a nice Jewish boy to become a rabbi? It's not, it's not as common. And that's really true, actually. I mean, the demographics of American Judaism have declined. There's really just not, you look at the graduating class of rabbinical school 40 years ago, and you look at them today, it's very different. There was almost like the confirmation pictures, it's different demographics, so there isn't as much demand. So part of that is just the nature of American culture and how it evolves. And another part of it is kind of how we view mental health, spirituality, healing. We are a more scientific culture. And I think for a long time, kind of rabbis, my grandfather, my mom's father, who was a general, just a general family doctor for his whole career, he would have been almost 100, maybe 100. He was born in 1912, so he would have been almost 112 now. Two of his daughters married psychiatrists, and he would often say, well, I was my patient's psychiatrist. So I think rabbis served that role for a lot of people. We're kind of a counselor, and not in the, not prescribing medicines and things, but serving as sort of a listening ear. And as culture became more specialized, that role declined. So the kind of people who wanted to go into that sort of healing aspect of it would become psychiatrists or therapists rather than rabbis. But now I think what I've found really interesting is there is more and more science is actually connecting with spirituality, and what role kind of faith and a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose can play in our own sense of well-being. I mean, that's a real powerful idea. I mean, that's what I wrote my book, The Happiness Prayer, about. And that positive psychology, which was founded by a guy named Martin Seligman, who was still a professor at Penn, really kind of reinforces Jewish wisdom and what our tradition has taught for a long time. So I think of the role of a rabbi as kind of combining that in a wonderful way, that you can draw from modern understandings of the human psyche and what goes on, and ancient wisdom. And I think obviously today, I mean, we can get into this more, but we need it more than ever. I mean, I'm sure, I know parents, grandparents are aware of this. I mean, the mental health issues that your grandchildren, my children, teenagers face is astronomical. It's higher than statistically it's higher than it's ever been. And anecdotally, I can tell you from families I meet with and talk with, the kind of feelings of anxiety and kind of just sense of purposelessness. Some of it came, of course, out of COVID and lockdowns, but it's been brewing for a long time. Addiction to social media, how our brains process relationships. It's really, really challenging. And so it's kind of, I think that's one of the reasons we did this, is bringing that wisdom, ancient and modern wisdom, to bear on it.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know how to follow all that, but, and I don't,
Wait. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Rabbi Moffic, you're going to need to put your mic closer to your mouth.
Okay.
Better?
yeah, how's this, okay?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how to follow that, and I don't know how you even remembered about that workshop. It was about children of psychiatrists back, and our daughter, who couldn't be here today, was there, and she said the advice I usually gave her was, don't think about things. That was my psychiatric advice about her problems. Is that good? Yeah? Yeah. So I never actually was all that interested in Judaism and from any perspective until he decided to become a rabbi, which was probably much more the influence of Rusty over there. And I thought, well, I better learn about Judaism because I don't want to embarrass him. So we started to go to Torah study, which Rusty wanted to go to for years. And lo and behold, I read these stories in Torah, and it's just like being back in my office, learning about family conflicts, narcissism, conflict between siblings, and so forth. So it was such an overlap, which is really a discovery for me, because before I thought, well, psychiatry does its thing in helping people, and then it can end and religion can take over, that the two are sort of split, which is sort of the Freudian tradition of psychiatry, because Freud didn't believe in God. He thought religion was neurotic, but he believed in being a Jew and connecting to the Jewish people. And actually, it sort of reminds me of a story. I think Vanessa said she likes Viktor Frankl a lot, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And this is a father and son story that I just told Russ the other day, or son and father. So back in 1939, as things were heating up in Vienna as far as the Nazis goes, Freud was still living there, so was Viktor Frankl. And Freud was reluctant to leave. He was sort of finally almost forced to by a patient who paid his way to go to London in 1939, and he was real sick. Viktor Frankl had met him. Freud helped him. And he had continued to work in the only Jewish hospital that was available. And he put in for a visa in 1939 to come to America. Well, come 1942, he still hadn't gotten his visa, but all of a sudden it came through. Unfortunately, the visa for his father and mother didn't come through at that time. His father came home around the same time, and I can't verify this whole story, but it's posited as being true. So his father comes home with a broken tablet from a synagogue that was burned down. And there were still some Jewish letters on there. And Viktor Frankl asked his father, what does that say? What remains there? And he said, honor your parents so that they will live long lives. And he had an epiphany then, and he decided not to use his visa. Stayed in Vienna. Soon he was put in a concentration camp. So was his father, so was his mother, so was his wife. His father died in the concentration camp. His parents died, and his wife died. And he survived, obviously. And to put that upon what Evan said, you all know, if you're familiar with him, he discovered while there that what gives your life meaning is the most important thing to survive, to help you survive. After the war, he went back to Vienna, of all places, wrote a book called Logotherapy, which is about finding your meaning in life, sort of like existential psychiatry, psychotherapy. And later in my career, especially when I had less time to see patients, that was kind of the scourge of modern medicine and psychiatry nowadays. What I fell back on is asking my patients, what gives your life meaning? And we'll tailor your treatment to that. That was kind of the main inroad into treatment. And so it became a very important part of my clinical work, although I don't do clinical work anymore, mainly write and talk. So this overlap with religion and psychiatry kind of meeting in spirituality is really important now. I mean, psychiatry was a field basically developed by Jews. It's not anymore. It's kind of mainly overrepresented by Asian Americans, but it's a field where it connected very strongly with Jewish history.
Okay, I'm going to kind of combine the first two questions. We know that the world and community has changed after COVID. How can we prepare ourselves and our children for a post-COVID world? You've got to be really...
Okay, I'll try to keep this nice and straight. So I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I think the impact on COVID really hit mid-teenagers, like kids who were 14 and 15 during lockdowns, I think got hit the hardest. And I think we're seeing some of that now. Younger too. So I think that's just the same kind of connecting with other people, the kind of mental health issues that arise from that. I mean, some of it was already happening in our culture, that people were, people are more distant than each other. I was just reading an article in The Atlantic about how people spend much less time with other people today. I mean, we all know that that's to be true, but the statistics are pretty jarring. But I actually want to focus on something slightly different. I've been really, I get interested in different topics. I've been reading and experimenting a lot with artificial intelligence, AI, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, probably not explored as much, but it's so interesting what is possible with information and with videos. And the reason I think it's interesting from the context of this question is a lot of work that is done by white-collar professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants, can be very easily, like, for example, not that I do this, but if I said to I have all these notes, I said, write me a sermon on why God chose Abraham using 3 ancient Jewish texts. In about 10 seconds, it would come out with a beautiful sermon. I mean, I'd revise it and things like that, but it really, it's extraordinary. When you play around with it, it's especially, and it's only going to get better. So why do I say this? Because if for many people, I'm certain for people here, a job provided a sense of meaning and purpose. It wasn't just to make a living. We all got to make a living, but it was also something meaningful. You did interesting things in work. You built community. Did something that made you part of something larger than yourself. So that's wonderful. But if so much of work becomes outsourced or done by computers, by artificial intelligence, which I think is pretty certain will happen, how will we find meaning? How? I mean, in many ways it'll be wonderful. We'll have more leisure time. We'll have, maybe it'll be like permanent retirement for everybody. But that's not enough. I mean, we all have energy. We all have drive, to do something productive. So I think that's going to be a big challenge. And I fear that the kind of natural draw or the natural sense of meaning that work could provide for people will go unfulfilled. And that's a big challenge. How do we, it's not unsurmountable, but it is something that we have to think carefully about.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. Freud said the key to life and finding meaning was work and love. So that's the work part which might be jeopardized, maybe not the love part. If you've seen the movie Dune or read the book, 10,000 years in the future, there's no computers and no AI. It was banned after a war. So maybe someday we're headed for that. So instead, what's used is psychedelics, a psychedelic called spice. And you may know that psychedelics are in their second coming now. They're going to be legalized for sure. They have, used correctly, they can give you some sense of connection, cosmic connection. So I don't know if psychedelics will develop here. But in the meanwhile, I think AI is a threat and an opportunity. I'm not technically adept at all, but I asked a colleague of mine about a year ago, because I've been very involved in writing and speaking about anti-Semitism, which has raised at the same time mental disturbances have raised these last few years, kind of gone hand in hand. Anyways, I asked him, could you ask ChatGPT for how do we solve anti-Semitism? And so my colleague did that. What came back is, we don't have that answer. We're not equipped to answer that question, which I thought was startling. Absolutely startling. Now, in one sense, okay, that makes sense, because all AI is doing is picking up what's already out there written, right? And there's no good solution we know of for anti-Semitism, but I thought maybe they'd be creative in some way and come up with a solution. My solution is to medicalize anti-Semitism and all the other antis and isms and social phobias, so that actually medicine and psychiatry can research them more, because whatever we're doing now isn't sufficient, obviously. And of course, what's happening in Israel has just escalated everything even higher now.
Well, you led us into my next question. If you had told me in the fall, when I said, can we have this meeting in March, that the war would still be going on, that there was a war, we didn't know until October 7th, I would have poo-pooed it and said that can't be. But here we are, the war is still going on. Actually, I'm leaving for Israel in 2 weeks, and Rabbi Sarada also going. We're going on missions. I think that's really important. But how do you think this has affected dialogue in the Jewish community?
I think tremendously. I think so there's a few levels. The first couple months after October 7th were very difficult as a rabbi. I can tell, it's difficult for people in Israel, obviously, but I would meet with people, and obviously people are worried about what's happening in Israel. But on a sort of more local level, people felt kind of betrayed by other liberal groups, and a feeling that, this terrible anti-Semitic incident with rape and murder and just senseless violence was committed against Jews, and people are silent or criticizing Israel for it. And I think just some, people in our congregation were just shocked. And I think, that word betrayal came up a lot. Obviously, it's gotten worse. I mean, the extent of the rise in anti-Semitism, I don't know if surprise is not the right word. I think maybe because it's been so extensive and so worldwide and unrelenting. So I think that has affected Jews' psyche. I mean, I'll even tell you, I remember, we're a fairly liberal synagogue, as we all know, but, I had several conversations with people that were going to gun ranges which surprised me, but in some sense didn't. I mean, I think people felt vulnerable. People felt scared. So I think that's still ramifications. And then I think over the last few months, there's the added complication of you see images on television. Obviously, it's a horrific tragedy for the Palestinians. We know that. I mean, that raises raises questions about, are we doing the right thing? Is Israel too aggressive? Why is this going on? So you have both the horror of being attacked, and then you have the questions of, is the war being conducted in the proper moral way? And that just raises the stakes all the time. And it's easy. I think it's somewhat tempting to be one side or the other. You can be an extremist and say, whatever Israel does is perfect, it's wonderful, Bibi Netanyahu is the greatest, all this. You can take that sort of extreme line. Or you could go the opposite extreme and say, Israel's committing genocide, it's awful, poor Palestinians are just, fighting their guerrilla warfare, fighting for their freedom. So you can take those extremes, but that's not the reality. And I think, obviously, the ambiguity and confusion can be mentally taxing, and I think it affects all of us. There's no question.
So I've tried to do three things professionally since October 7th. One is to see if I could round up some colleagues, especially who spoke Hebrew, to help out in Israel. But the bureaucracy is actually pretty difficult. So it hasn't been all that successful. But even the therapists in Israel feel overwhelmed and traumatized now. So that was one thing. The second thing is to try to keep my relationships with psychiatrists from other religions intact. In the last 10, 20 years, I've done a lot of interfaith work and edited books on the different religions and psychiatry. Well, everything was fine with psychiatrists who were Christian, Hindu, but not Muslim. I lost half of my relationships with the Muslim colleagues I had worked with for 10 to 20 years. And they said, I still want to be friends with you, but I can't work with you publicly. I'm going to get too much criticism from it, plus I don't like what Israel is doing, and so forth. So that's been jeopardized. And the third thing I decided to do is, as Evan mentioned, this whole thing with Israel has been tremendously traumatic for the country, and it ripples out to Jews everywhere, right, including us. So I thought we needed to talk about it as a Jewish community, about how we're feeling, learn from one another what helps us cope, try to achieve more resilience. And so I've done a couple community meetings in Milwaukee about sharing how we feel and to try to process that successfully. And I think that's really important all over. It sort of follows the basic framework I use nowadays. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, my rabbi gave me the Hebrew name of Hillel, because I had forgotten what my Hebrew name was, and nobody could figure it out. So he gave me the name of Hillel, and his saying, which most everybody knows, if I'm not for myself, who will be? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And I think that first part has to be first, for yourself, for the Jewish community as a community, but it has to be tied very closely with the second, which is the tikkun olam, to help others. So I think even now there's a little bit of danger in paying more attention to helping the rest of the world than ourselves. So that's been sort of my approach. I think it's devastating what's happened there. You know, the ambivalence I feel about what's happened to the people in Israel, the hostages and so forth, is counteracted by all the things you see on TV and so forth, especially all the kids that are killed. I mean, they obviously aren't part of what's happened. So there's so much ambivalence and anguish, I think, that so many of us have.
Surprise question. Well, the next holiday coming up is Purim. The adult spiel is on Saturday, March 23rd. Get your reservations in. But the next holiday after that is Passover. And as things are ramping up in Israel, there's an election coming here. We don't need to mention any names of what's happening in the American electorate, but what advice can you give us? I'm thinking about my Seder table and the diverse opinions of how can you have discussion? How can you have dialogue? What's your best advice for us?
That's a tough question, and I think it's. I mean, what was that old? There was a joke. Don't talk about politics or religion. You know, I mean. No, I don't think that's good advice. Obviously, that all comes up. But I do think politics has become such a source of division in our country. I mean, people don't want to marry someone who has a different political opinion. You know, sometimes families don't want to. I mean, it has become this great source of division, more than it really has historically. It really wasn't. I mean, you look at statistics about who marries who back in the 90s, and before then, politics was divisive, but it didn't divide spouses and families. And so I think trying to back away from that, trying to understand somebody else's perspective. Now, this is very difficult because what's happened is, and it's probably true for a lot of us, is politics begins to take on moral dimensions. Very strong moral dimensions. And morality is something that we generally don't compromise on. These are our uncompromising principles. But politics is always about compromise. I mean, that's the way it works. And so, I mean, that's why, that was the genius of the American founders, was they tried to separate religion and state. To say, when it comes to politics and government, this is about compromise, and you have to appreciate another's point of view, even if you vociferously disagree with it. And then morality was in the church, which you could be uncompromising. That's why, you know, I mean, this explains a lot of laws. A synagogue or a Catholic school can hire and fire pretty much anybody. It is perfectly legal for a Catholic school to fire somebody who gets pregnant out of wedlock. Now, that might be horrific for us, especially if it's a good teacher. I would say that's horrible. That's wrong. And it is wrong from our perspective, but the way American law works is that is a separate sphere from government. And that kind of split between our religion and our politics is increasingly eroding. And so I don't have the answer, but the kind of approach that I would urge is just to try to be appreciative of others' perspectives. Somebody saying something you disagree with isn't always an attack on what you believe. And that's hard. And our media encourages us to be offended and to be divisive. And so I think having that empathy and understanding and not taking it always personally is a good approach.
Yeah, I would probably take that a little further. Maybe it's because of my work, which essentially is based on a relationship with a patient. And so you want to try to find out their story without value judgments and so forth. And I think it's important to try to bridge people with different, even strong belief systems, and to do it with curiosity and respect and empathy. It's very, very hard to do, but I think that's the attitude where you can learn where all this is coming. I'll throw out a little bomb, politically speaking now, just as an example. I thought when President Biden took over, he should have thanked past President Trump for what he did to help us get through COVID. Okay? He should have thanked him. I thought that might have simmered down a little bit of the anger and rage that President Trump had to be valued in that sort of way. And I think that's sort of the attitude, because I think empathy and understanding is really important, but then you got to do something good with it. And good can take various forms, but I think the respect and interest is crucial, because if we don't talk to one another with really difficult beliefs, they just get hardened and hardened and harden your hearts, just like the Pharaoh heart got hardened in Passover.
So this is the last question from me, and then we'll take questions from everyone here. What gives you, wait a minute, I had it really nicely done, let me read it. What gives resilience and hope in these times?
What gives resilience and hope? I mean, I think community really does. I mean, I think a sense of purpose, stuff we've talked about, but relationships and community. I mean, as people here know, our congregation grew a lot during COVID, and I mean, part of that is just demographics, more people moving to the suburbs, things like that. That's certainly part of it. But I do think that we realized a little bit more of what's important in life. And what's important is community and fellowship. I mean, I could tell you, even just anecdotally, our Friday night services have more people now than any time in my 15 years here. And of course, we're larger because of the unification, but I see there are at least 3 or 4 families that come almost every Friday night with kids and grandparents. That wasn't happening 5-6 years ago. It really wasn't. I mean, it saddens me that it wasn't, but it wasn't. It was not something that families did a lot with their time. And I'm seeing more, and I do see now more and more families coming together. I see people, coming. We're working on revitalizing our Chavurah program. We tried to revitalize it 10 years ago. It didn't work, and we had great people working on it. It wasn't as if our skills were bad. I don't think so. I think there's just a greater appreciation now for the relationships in the community, and I think that is a great source of resilience. And we need it, because things are becoming more tense and more difficult and more anxious. And if we have people around us that lift us up and that we can connect to and be honest with, that's a tremendous gift. And it's rare too. I mean, I think we have to encourage it. We have to find new ways of encouraging it.
Yeah, I think you got the essence of developing resilience, which in my field sort of goes with these 3 aspects. One is you have to talk about the trauma that's happened to you. Number 2 is get the support of loved ones, including communities like a synagogue. And 3rd is a slightly revised vision of the future from what you've gone through. I will say, though, that you can develop too much resilience. And I could probably try to apply that to Israel. You could get so confident in how strong you are that you ignore your vulnerability and risk. It's actually an occupational hazard of physicians. You build up this resilience because you have to deal with life and death, difficult decisions without actually a lot of support, and you get more and more resilient. Well, what happens then? You burn out, and you're of less help to yourself and to patients. Let me jump to the international Because next week I'm on Zoom, which was so important to develop during COVID, a big gain. Anyways, I'm on a Zoom panel with psychiatrists from around the world. One a Hindu, one a Christian, myself, and one Muslim. So 4 major religions. And the topic is, how does each of our religions deal with trauma? And how do you think we could come out of this Mideast war situation? And I tried to think of something positive to end with, and this is what I've come up with for now. There's at least 3 times in history where I think we've come back from horrendous relationships with another country and people. One is in Egypt, where we now at least have a peace agreement, and I think Evan wrote in the book we did on anti-Semitism that that's where anti-Semitism started. There's the Spanish Inquisition, and we've been invited back to become citizens of Spain. And there's Germany. Who would have imagined that Jews in Israel could have a good relationship with Germany since World War II? But we have. I mean, I think that is almost miraculous. So I think there are these examples. I don't know if that will happen with Arabs, Muslims, and Jews. I actually often think of this paradigm story in Torah where Abraham and Sarah were trying to have a child. You know, Abraham and Hagar had Isaac. Then Sarah gave birth to Ishmael. Ishmael was banned with Hagar. And was said to be able to lead a people of his own by God in the future. And Isaac went on to have a leadership role with Jews. But I don't know if that instance of sort of family conflict has been overcome. And I don't know how much that story pervades our 2 different peoples, but it needs to be resolved.
Well, all good thoughts. Now I'm going to take questions, so, Rick Schuster. Going to make me run.
Yes. Just about reach it. Social media, a blessing or a curse, and how can we control it and still be true to our American ideals of free speech and so forth?
It's a great question. So social media, blessing or curse, and how can we remain true to our American founding principles while dealing with it? I've given this a lot of thought, and it's obviously nuanced. I think certain parts of social media are a real blessing. I mean, the ability to learn. I mean, you can find communities, people who are, maybe a little awkward or different from the norm in their, in wherever they grow up. You can find people like you all over the world. So you can really form, my own daughter finds people who love the same music, certain bands she loves, and they're in Tennessee or they're here or there, and she connects with them, and it's wonderful. And sometimes they meet up at concerts in Chicago, and that's very fulfilling and wonderful for her. And I think you can times that by 10,000, where people can find connection with other people who are similar to them or have similar issues. It's truly wonderful in that way. But there are tremendous problems. I think Instagram, which is obviously owned by Facebook, is generally very negative. It promotes certain kind of images of a perfect life and a perfect body, and I think that infiltrates how teenagers and others interact. Many of the social media technologies, people get paid a tremendous amount of money to figure out how to keep your eyes on that screen for another 2 seconds. That is what Facebook engineers do. It's constantly, what kind of carrot? How long should it take to load? How do we keep people focused on this? And that is addicting. It's very much can be like a drug. And so that, I think, is tremendously dangerous. You can actually, there was an article in The Atlantic a few years ago, basically charting the rise in teenage mental illness and loneliness, and with the adoption of smartphones. So, because the Apple iPhone came out in 2007, but it really didn't start to really, everyone didn't have a smartphone until about 2012. That's really, and you see starting in 2012, the mental health issues and smartphone usage go exactly parallel. So I think that's a danger. Now, when it comes to free speech, I kind of am an absolutist. I think free speech is a great gift, and I think we should be very, very careful with how we regulate what people say, because what's banned at one time. But I do think that figuring out ways to protect minors and others from kind of hateful messages and that kind of language is important, but again, it's very tricky. But I would generally err on the side of not regulating speech. I think that's kind of it may seem tempting in the short run, but can be very damaging in the long run.
See how much he knows about psychiatry and psychology? I probably don't need to add anything, but I'm an anomaly. I don't have an iPhone. I've never had one. I rely on my wife for all that sort of stuff. I know how to use a computer, and I'm a really good typist, but I don't have an iPhone. I think there are more problems than benefits from the internet and so forth, and I think there needs to be more regulation. For free speech, I'd probably lean toward trying to make it clear that lots of free speech is psychologically harmful. So, we don't take that as an exception for free speech like we do for something physical, but it is harmful and I think does need to be better regulated. And the whole addiction thing is a major, major problem. And there's plenty of research now that you can see the brain changes that are involved with that. So we're kind of raising a different kind of future human being now.
I would comment on some of that because a lot of the news has really been anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian, and some of it's very disturbing. So I think that might have been part of what Rick is talking about. I watch a lot of news, and some of it is really disturbing, and there's so much anti-Semitism now, and I think the news right now is actually intensifying that.
Oh, yeah. I think, we all get news sources. News has become very customized. This is not the 1980s or 70s, 60s where you had 3 major news networks and they generally tried to find a middle ground. People can get the news they want, and I think that distorts all of our views. And everybody, I know, most of us, I think probably all of us are very pro-Israel, but Israel's spinning the news for its point of view also, just like the Palestinians are. Everybody is spinning the news to promote their side, and I think we should recognize that. That's just, it makes it hard. It makes it difficult to figure out the truth, and so, and it kind of pushes us to always choose sides, but it is. Everything we see is biased, and even places that try, certainly, some places are more biased than others. The New York Times is less biased than Breitbart.com. We know that. But it's not like the New York Times is free from bias. Everybody has bias, and I think understanding that and going in with eyes wide open. So I think it's important to visit and also to cultivate relationships with them. I've had wonderful conversations with friends and colleagues in Israel that really opened my eyes to things that I wasn't seeing in the news. And so I think that's important.
Yeah, I think Israel has been losing the media war for sure. I think we had it for one day, and then we lost it once we started bombing and so forth, because all you essentially see is the devastation in Gaza, right? And how can people in general not be sympathetic to that, no matter what the reason is? We don't see what's happened with the hostages who are still there. You know, we see some from when they come home. I understand there's some sort of developed controversy about whether to release some of the videos that really depict the horrors that happen to women and other people on the invasion time, whether that should be shown or not. And I think there's reasons on both sides to do it or not to do it. I would probably lean toward having that be revealed publicly.
Okay.
Evan, both you and your father talked about the word compromise, that it is critical and important. It seems to me that that is unbelievably lacking in Israel and also in the United States. There is no compromise. It's one against the other with no give, hardly any talk, and we can't get anything accomplished. Maybe you could speak to that issue again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ed. I mean, I think this actually relates to the question we just discussed. The media and social media has no interest in compromise. How do you get more eyeballs on your, if I wanted to start a YouTube channel or a Facebook group and I wanted to grow it really fast and get a lot of subscribers, the thing would be is to be really, really radical and demonize the other side and say how bad that that's how you get attention, is you're loud and I mean, obviously we watch politics, we see how that works. It's you get attention by being outrageous. And that is what our media encourages. But I have a generally optimistic view of human nature. I think we can be, look, a synagogue, we have 650 families. Our families, they're different. I mean, we're the same, but we figure out ways to compromise and come together. Families, where Vanessa asked about families, yes, there's tension, there's always problems, yes, but we figure out how to get along with each other. We have that ability as humans. And we're, in a sense, fighting what a media is encouraging us. And so that makes it harder. It makes it, it's like, it's an uphill battle. We have to use skills that we have, but we are not being reinforced by the larger culture. So I think it's possible, but I think it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. You know, when traumatic and bad things happen and it hits us personally, our fight and flight response goes right into operation. And so you either have an urge to fight back or you freeze and don't do nothing. And then you try to get more power and find a scapegoat. And getting past that is really, really hard. You know, our human nature has really barely changed throughout our whole history, right? We've done this tremendous technical cognitive developments with inventions and so forth, but our emotional responses really haven't changed at all, and we haven't really known how to master them to the degree we have to, but we can. So I still have some optimism also for that.
I want to thank you both for your presentation. It was wonderful and very informative. My question relates to the communication between teenagers and their grandparents. I'm finding I was very hesitant to go to text messaging. I always fought text messaging because I prefer talking to somebody on the telephone. And now I find that the only way I can get my grandchildren is to text them, and they text me back. And so I'd like to find out if there's a way that we can communicate with people without always text messaging.
My daughter texts me from her room, which is down the hall. Yeah, I mean, I do think it's partially a function of the culture and being addicted to phones. I think that has certain ramifications. It is, I mean, sometimes kids feel awkward talking to adults generally. And, you know, I was very close with my grandparents, and there was no alternative but to call them on the phone or be in presence. But I wonder if I had had this alternative, would I have been texting more? So I think it's hard to say. I mean, it's kind of, if it's the only way to communicate with them, I would say just do it. You know, it's not ideal, obviously, and sometimes the two can coexist. You can be together, but also, you know, have certain occasions when you're together, but then do a lot of communication by texting too.
Yeah, I would sort of agree. A while back, before texting occurred, I was asked a few times to talk about grandparents and their grandchildren, including teenagers. Once here in Chicago, someplace, I forgot where. Because I think grandparents have had this crucial role of being there for their grandkids to kind of modulate between they and their parents, and as moral models. And when you have these short text messages back and forth, I don't know how well you can do that. So the more you can be with your grandkids, teenagers, live, I think the more opportunity there is to do that crucial stuff.
That's so true.
I'm for text messaging. In the spirit of compromise, we are very lucky to have a gigantic school which needs to move back in here. I see Cantor Jay coming in to lead the next thing at 11. I just want to tell you that next week is not just daylight savings time, but we have a field trip to the Holocaust Museum. You need to register through Macomb. If you need help doing that, please see me. And it's going to be, I'll have what she's having. It's the deli exhibit at the Holocaust Museum. We'll also have time. Jim, are we going to have time to go to other Holocaust exhibits while we're there? Yes, no. Yes, no. Okay.
Those that want to go on after that and remain across the exhibit, a lot of you have seen it, that's fine, but I think I would think whoever wants to group that as well. That's probably about 90 minutes of your highlight. So that's a bigger thing, but that's like.
Right. So I already have 27 people signed up, 28 with me. Woo! But we need to know if you're coming so that we can get enough docents. We're so glad that Jim Schuster, who is a docent there, will be our docent. So with no further ado, I'm sure these two young men will speak to us in the lounge, and if you have other questions, you can ask them. Big round of applause. Thank you.
This thing on. 1, 2, test, test. Hey. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Who's having a good day today? Whoa, that's a lot of people. Cool. Well, we are happy to be at Lev Learning. I hope everyone got a good night's sleep because we're going to wish each other good morning. Can everybody stand up? Yeah, get up, everyone. Stand up. And put your hands in the air. Tuck your hands behind your head. Boker tov, boker tov, boker tov, tov, tov. Boker tov, boker tov, boker tov, tov, tov. Boker tov, boker tov. Boker, 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 boker. All right, let me see your game faces on. Come on, let's really say good morning to each other. Hands in the air. Tuck them behind your head. Boker tov, boker tov, boker tov, tov, tov. Boker tov, boker tov, boker tov, tov. Get silly. Boker tov, boker tov. Boker, 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 boker tov. All right, have a seat, everyone. Sit up tall. Take a deep breath. Rub your hands. Shalom. A long time ago, our ancestors lived in tents in the desert. Let's look around the room. Look at all your tents. This is our community. It's like we're at camp together. All of the Jewish people. When we get together and pray, we remember when we all lived together. Now we live in different houses. Some of us live in different neighborhoods. But a long time ago, we were all together. And whenever we see our community, we sing the words Ma Tovu. Can you sing with me? Ma Tovu. Ohalecha Yaakov. Ohalecha Yaakov. Mishkenotecha. Mishkenotecha. Yisrael. One more time. Ma Tovu, ohalecha, ohalecha, ya, mishkenotecha, mishkenotecha, Yisrael. Am I forgetting anything? Is there anything else we sing when we sing Ma Tovu? Yeah, what are we forgetting? Oh, I think I heard someone say, my toes green. What was it? Oh, blue. Well, let me hear you. My toes blue. How's that? I dropped a hammer on my shoe. Ouch! What a silly thing to do. My toes blue. Okay, everybody. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank your turn. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Now let me hear you like you mean it. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Okay, I'm going to go first. I want to thank God for bagels and cream cheese. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. For what? Ice cream. Let me hear you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you for life. None of us would be here if it weren't for life. That's the truth. Let me hear you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. For family. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. For what? Oh, anybody have a Nintendo Switch? Thank you, God. Let me hear you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. For what? For friends. Anybody got their buddies here? Hebrew school buddies. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Let me hear you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Can't hear you. God, thank you, God. For dogs. Ooh, I went on a dog walk this morning. It was awesome. Yeah. For which one? For food? Ooh, who had some food today? Everybody's hand got to be up for food. Come on, let me hear you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Whoop. For what? For help? Wow, did anybody get some help today from mom and dad? Oh, well, that's a